Community Beacon, Fridays at 6:30 EST, with your hosts Michaeldseville and Joel Simmons. A channel whose focus is liberty. A place where the lessons discussed and taught will create openings to a more open and freer mindset. A mindset where you may reach the height of your potential and excel. Here are your hosts, Mike and Joel. Community Beacon, Fridays at 6:30 EST, with your hosts Michaeldseville and Joel Simmons. A channel whose focus is liberty. A place where the lessons discussed and taught will create openings to a more open and freer mindset. A mindset where you may reach the height of your potential and excel. Here are your hosts, Mike and Joel.
What is going on? What is going on? Appreciate you all. Community Beacon. It feels like it's been quite a while to me.
Anyway. It does.
But we're gonna quickly get into the groove of things. Guys, thanks for tuning in to Community Beacon. We're dropping this every Friday at just around 6:30. We appreciate you all for checking in. Guys, remember on Mondays, What It Takes. I'm still dropping those episodes. Check me out on Mondays. What is it called? What It Takes.
What It Takes.
Of course, on Wednesdays. Of course, on Wednesdays, we got It Starts With Me, with the brother is always interviewing some enlightening person. You'll get some great interviews out of it. Of course, brother. I'm not even going to ask.
Let me tell you something, Mike. Let me tell you, man. This season has been phenomenal.
Okay.
I believe that we're really touching people in Europe right now. So we got a bunch of people in Europe that we've been really touching, and I'm definitely grateful. I'm hoping that everybody's getting something out of this. I get something out of it, and it appears that, you know, those that we've been speaking with, they're getting something out of it. It's here for you guys. It's here for you all. It's here for me. Please show up, be there. It's worth the time, or check it out later. It's worth the time. It really is. You know, I'm not being biased, although I'm being biased.
Well, at least it's stated, the brother, and I agree with the brother wholeheartedly, man. Check out It Starts With Me. It drops on Tenacity Foundation's YouTube. Go check that out. And of course, on Fridays, we like to culminate the week with this show right here, Community Beacon. Oh, yeah, you got to check out the Male Perspective as well. That drops on the Male Perspective YouTube channel, where it's a panel of us guys. And we're talking about what else? The Male Perspective. And we've been having
what YouTube channel? What YouTube channel?
The Male Perspective. It's called the Male Perspective.
The Male Perspective YouTube channel.
Is also the channel.
Check that out. Check that. That's what Beethoven and you and what is it? Chris Seville.
Beethoven helps produce it. I wouldn't even say Beethoven produces it. It's produced at Beethoven's Podcast Plus studio in Rivera Beach. Yeah, let's give a shout out to Alexis. Alexis is actually one who produces it. She comes up with all the questions, and she's in the background. She's actually burning the midnight oil, so to speak. So shouts out to Alexis. Beethoven did put it together. He has his hands and everything like the Godfather. He's got the
Oh
puppets
man,
on the
are you on one of those strings? Which
yeah,
string are you then?
yeah, apparently I am because I'm on there just yapping my mouth off on when we meet on the Tuesday. So and it's been very enlightening. What I love about that show is I'm a stats guy. I'm actually
Yes.
my personality is driver. But secondary is definitely is analytical. So I love to bring stats. Stats mean something, and for us to interpret the stats. And there's a lot of misconceptions that go on in our community that I feel is important that we bring to the forefront. In order to change the narrative, we have to have some facts, things based on specific things. And it's interesting, and we can transition into that because me and the brother were kind of talking about negotiations, mediations, etc., prior to us getting on the show. And essentially everything most people do, it comes from a sense of value, and definitely it's emotional. A lot of the decisions we make, most decisions we make are based on emotional decisions. Later on, we back those up with facts, things. It's kind of like a confirmation bias. We search for ways in order to confirm, or rather to prove the point that we already have in our mind that was based on a lot of emotionality. And that's what goes on in the community oftentimes. What's interesting is the narrative is pushed, and then it's later on, it was never backed up by any stats. So it's interesting where we're going at. And I think personally, when we figure out these different stats, we can kind of move in a certain direction. Guys, today's going to be a really freestyle show, really laid back. Like I said, we were on here talking a little bit earlier about negotiations, mediations, and where do we leave off, brother? Because I know we're getting into it.
Yeah, man. Well, we were just talking about the differences between civil and domestic type of mediations.
Right.
But really, I feel like we need to take it to a deeper level, because I've got a lot of friends and loved ones that are going through some type of mediation. I myself was in the middle of a mediation for property purposes. And the thing is that you were talking about the emotional impact of the individual. You also were talking about the facts, and it's crazy because mediation starts at home, right? I mean, even as a child, you start mediating with your parents the entire time. It's like, hey, it's time for you to go to bed, and negotiation starts
Immediately.
Why should I go to bed right now? And this is negotiation, the art of negotiation, the child versus the parent. Now, if you got two parents in the house, then sometimes you'll end up with mediation. And the child will be like, Dad, tell mom I should be able to, like my son, tell mom, why can't I pick up my own clothes? I need to pick up my own clothes, and I walk out of his room and I'm like, come on, let the boy pick out his own clothes. He's old enough to do this. And she's like, no, because every time he picks out his own clothes, he always wears something stupid. And I'm like, oh man, so now I'm not going to go back and say something stupid.
More information is introduced at that point.
So I'm like, listen, son, she's talking about you always put on flip-flops. Listen, man, if you just think about this, wear the appropriate clothes. He's like, but I like flip-flops. And I got to go back and defend him. But every single time, I got to bring a little bit of this side and a little bit of this side till we can hit the middle ground. So I think it's important that young people learn how to negotiate and that they understand the value of what they're negotiating for. And maybe that's what we should be talking about,
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about it. And one of the things that we spoke about earlier was the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. If you want, this is a FBI hostage negotiator, guy who was going in negotiating on behalf of kidnapping victims. I think he was at the head of the FBI's international division. So, I mean, he has a bunch of different stories. Some of the stories you hear over and over again, but it's good for him to give us that refresher as well. And he calls the book Never Splits the Difference because from his perspective, and especially from his side as the hostage negotiator, he said that you can't split it with with a hostage. Like the United States does not technically negotiate with terrorists. That's what they say. They don't negotiate with people. So when they started to come in, after they just developed this new technique, because before they were saying as a hostage negotiator is about holding off until the SWAT team can arrive so that they can basically storm the place. But they were getting too many casualties at that time. And then so now then they decided that at this point in time it was, how do we negotiate with these people? And what he said, he's offering is jail time. But he's offering jail time, but he's not. That's how the name of the book, Never Split the Difference, came up, because there's no win-win. But in regards to these different disputes, oftentimes what happens is that people all want a sense of autonomy. When just in this specific example, your son wants to feel as if he has some sense of autonomy. Your wife probably at some point in time, and shouts out to Kathy, gave him some autonomy. And every time she did, he ends up wearing flip-flops. And then here you come in as the, quote unquote mediator / negotiator, trying to figure out what's what. And what the book teaches you is that most people are looking for empathy. They want to feel like they're being heard. And him as a negotiator, or whichever side he's negotiating on, is, although you may not necessarily agree with the person, you have to allow them to be heard. And the more that you allow them to be heard, and they know that you know what you're saying, the more that you can get your way. He says, I allow them to have my way. And that comes with with some patience. It comes with allowing people to be heard, etc. And he has different, go get the book, because there's different little advice that he gives in these different situations. And what I found after reading the book and utilizing a lot of the points in it, it works. It's amazing what happens once people are able to be heard. So I heard, brother, I heard when you said, when you went back in there and you spoke to the brother, to your son, Jonah, like Jonah, you gave him a chance to say, hey, your mother says you're wearing flip-flops all the time. Sometimes you don't need to wear flip-flops. But then you allowed him to speak his point. And sometimes that's mostly, according to this book, and what I've seen is that some people just want to get it out. They just want to get out their side of the story, how it is that they feel. They want you to know that you totally understand it. And then after you talk it out for a certain amount of time, sometimes they just come up with the same thing that you would have came up with, or what the mother would have came up with. Well, listen, this time I know there's a time and place for everything. I'll wear flip-flops on certain times. Other times I will be dressed, appropriately for wherever it is. I'm sure that was introduced into the conversation. And this gives a way of both, them feeling like they've gained some ground in that situation. I don't know. You tell me, how did it end up going? What was the final outcome?
For them, it's always been something there, and I'm gonna tell you the reason why. And I just want to drop this nugget for everybody, because you're kind of diving into the reasons behind it, and it's the difference between hearing and listening. The mediator is, by design, they are there to listen to the argument of both sides.
Right.
And because they are actually listening and they're not just hearing. So hearing is like walking down the street and you hear all the rat-a-tat-tats and the cars go by. You're not really focused on anything at all. You just hear the world passing you by. Some of us are focused in our mind and we don't hear anything at all that's being said out loud. Some of us are focused on music or something else, or maybe we're just focused on where we need to be. So we're not listening. But when you listen, when you take the time to pay attention to exactly what's going on, what the words people are saying, when you focus and you become intentional about what you're listening to, then all of a sudden things begin to occur inside your mind. Begin to see a point of view that you hadn't seen before, and that's the changing, that's the difference. So we all should be mediating our own conversations between our two ears. We should be doing our own mediation. So between the two of them, the issue is they weren't listening to each other.
Yeah.
Both of them were saying why what they thought they were doing was the best thing to do, and they didn't consider anything else on the other side.
I love that word.
So,
I love the word consider. Go ahead, brother.
Consider.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we take that time to actually do this, we'll find that we actually begin to do this crazy thing that everybody talks about, which is called communication.
Communication. A lot of people talk. A lot of people don't communicate. There's a lot of talking going on. There's not a lot of communication. I love consider. The book calls it tactical empathy, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. Where are they coming from? Oftentimes, I heard there was another book that this guy happened to co-write, is where he says when he's talking about salespeople, and this is just, I guess it may we can use it besides just being in sales, that we often, especially when we're having, I'm gonna use these quote marks, communication.
Air quotes.
Yeah, I'm gonna air quote communications. Is that we want to run over to the other side of the street and pull somebody back to our side of the street so that they can see where our viewpoint is. That's what we do. That's what a lot of people do when they're talking. Real communication is, I go to the other side of the street. I look at that person's vantage point. Now, at that point in time, I can see whether or not this person may not have the same information I have. This person, or this might be a better place for us to be. But because of where they are, their POV, they can't see it. On my side of the street, it might be, there might be a height difference. So I'm able to see what's coming over the bend or around the corner. Where this person is on the other side of the street, we can see each other. This is the talking, and I'm yelling at you like, come on over here, or don't keep walking down that street. But you don't see that. You see clear ways. But I need to get on your side. But when I get on your side, I might have an even better vantage point. So now I have more information. But I need to go to your side of the street, try to get as much of your information as possible, and then say, okay, well, I have some more information on this side of the street. And then and then we can walk over to my side of the street if that's, if it allows. And then you can see this side of the street, and then we both can make a decision on what it is we want to do. Oftentimes when we have these talking communication, it's a my way or the highway kind of deal, And what happens is, and you might have some people who may go along with you because you're able to persuade them, but you're not going to be batting as good as you can bat. You might be doing 20-25%. When you possibly could be doing, in this case with Chris Voss, these guys had a 93% win rate. That's crazy. When we talk about what we do in sales, like most salespeople are doing, 5%. That's a really, really good salesperson. But when you're talking about a hostage situation where these guys what they're offering is jail time, and you have a 93% win rate, there has to be something to that. And that something is the empathy, and then being able to demonstrate it with the person. And I guess that's the next question we can get into, because we talked about the empathy, is how do you show empathy? Because in our mind, we can say, listen, I see where you're coming from. In our mind, that's what we're saying, I think, oft times. And then we start to blab out a result. Men do that often. Like, men just want to give the results. we tend to be very result oriented. Women tend to want to be heard. They want to be listened to. So while we're giving out these results, they feel your result might be the best way. Hey, it might lead them to $1 million, but they're not going. Some people aren't going unless you show them how can they be heard. And I know you, brother, like you are a master at people being heard, and actually a lot of the stuff they do in the book you do anyways. But before I introduce that part into it, tell me, like, how do you, like, your communication style is so effective? Like, what are some of the things that you do as you're having conversations with people, clients, family members, people in relationship, friends, etc.? Because you're very good at it.
Well, I definitely appreciate that. I don't remember who it was, my grandmother, my mama, or my dad, but I think it was my dad. But he said, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, and there's scriptures that support that, be quick to hear, rather than to speak. So, I think that just by me having grown up as an only child and not having anybody else there. I mean, I had my aunties, but I didn't meet any of my siblings until I got much, much older. I didn't even know I had all those siblings, and some of those siblings I got as I became older by marriage and things like that. So I was always in my head. I was always listening. You know, my worst enemy was in between my ears. So I was always considering things, and I had some difficulties with a lot of different things. But you know, you use the word vantage point. You know, that has become a vantage to me. You know, because now I naturally listen to people, and I've honed in those skills after making my life with Christ. I honed in those skills because I had to learn how to not say or do dumb stuff and get myself into worse trouble than I was already in, especially after now I'm doing my best to live a righteous life. It's like, well, if I open up my mouth and tell them what exactly how I feel, then I'm going to do something wrong. So how do I do this? And so I got there by a lot of prayer, a lot of fasting, a lot of meditation, a lot of reading, and then I just shut my mouth. I just stopped talking. And in the beginning, I shut my mouth, and all of a sudden I would just think about all the stuff that they say wrong, everything that they were wrong about. And then over time, I had shut my mouth so long, I started to hear, I started to listen into what they were saying. I was like, well, hold on. From their point of view, that actually sounds pretty right. That actually makes sense. And sometimes I'll even hold my tongue so that I could listen a little bit longer. And that's what I would do to understand what their aim was, why they felt the way they felt. And at that very moment, I started to have uh, not epiphanies, but ideas would just come into my mind of how to help them rather than how to fight them. And that became my blessing, you know, because then I also learned that I can listen to somebody and I can say a very short prayer, and I may be even able to get even more than I had even first thought about it. Because sometimes you can tell, you know, when someone's about to go deep on you, they pause, they change their mannerism, they stand a little bit different, they prepare themselves. Because whenever it's deep, most of the time people prepare their body to be able to deliver whatever it is. And if you're just hearing, like you hear stuff like you passing in the streets, the horns honking and stuff like that, you won't catch those little intricacies of an individual's mannerisms. But when you listen to them, all of a sudden, even on the telephone, you'll be able to tell that brief moment of silence and then the way that they start that next word. And at that very moment, that's when I start my prayer. I'm like, Lord, I don't know what's about to happen, but I need your help. And then I just listen. And I'm listening to two things. I'm listening to what they're saying, and I'm listening to what the Lord will tell me.
All right, listen, and we got to get this show out. Let's get this show out, and we're going to stop right there, and then we're going to come back to this point, brother. Let's do it, guys. We appreciate you all, but it's almost the time for us to get our show out to you all. We're going to put this out, and then we're going to come right back to it, and this will probably be on the next week. Appreciate you all. We love you all. This is some good stuff. This is some deep stuff. So I'm hoping you all are picking up what we're dropping. We'll see you in a little bit.
Peace.